Hey friends, Christy here with Little Roots Ranch, and today we're going to talk about gardening tips for August. August is an interesting month because we get a second spring, and not a second spring in the fact that nobody's starting tomatoes or peppers or any of the squashes or anything like that, but all of the cool weather crops are coming back again. And that's really exciting because I haven't planted Asian greens, mustard greens, any of those items just because they don't do well in the heat of the day that comes with late July and even a little bit into early August. Though it is early August and I've actually got a jacket on, which was crazy because we just came off our heat wave. But anyway, so I wanted to run through a few tips for the garden in August and then talk about some seeds to plant. Or again, just to reiterate, August is like second spring. And so, but a little bit warmer, at least in the beginning. And so that's a great time to start seeds. One thing I want to talk about is early August versus late August. And though not 100% official and across the board, it's easy to think about it as early August for fall crops and late August for winter crops. Now, you might be thinking, Christy, that's only the difference of a month or a couple weeks. And the answer is that is a huge difference. If you look at generally, the weather's been throwing us for loops in this past year. But if you look at the weather of the beginning of August, it's still nice and warm, kind of a little bit summer conditions. Not today, but generally. Tonight we're supposed to get a good amount of rain, fingers crossed. But towards the end of August, that's when your temperatures really start cooling down in general, and that's something that affects germination. So if you were to take, like, let's say arugula, and today's a cooler than normal day, but if I started arugula today and it's the early August and the temperatures are generally in the 70s, that arugula is going to pop out 2 to 3 times faster than if I planted it at the end of August. And so the length of time for germination ripples through in the growth cycle. And so that's why, kind of on average, as a general rule of thumb, crops planted, especially your quicker growing crops, planted early August versus late August is usually a fall versus winter harvest. And so, like, again, taking that example of the arugula, if I plant arugula today, which I am going to be actually, I've been making my soil blocks because I'm so excited to plant all of the cool weather crops, including my Asian greens. But if I plant arugula today, I will be able to enjoy it during the fall. And if I plant, which I will, plant arugula at the end of August, it's going to be a little slower to germinate and a little slower to grow because heat, it helps with, and sunlight, day length, all that stuff helps with growth. So even though it's only a couple weeks difference, or several weeks I should say, it ends up being a really big difference. And for me, I have the greenhouse and my goal is to be able to harvest year round. But especially for a small garden or something like that, you get that arugula looking nice and have it under like a cloche or something, or a little greenhouse or even some cover, or even not, and roll the dice to see what kind of winter we have. And you can eat off of that all throughout winter, depending on how much you grow, of course. If you only have like one plant or a couple plants, it's going to be hard to sustain that because the regrowth will not be as fast during the winter, during the summer, or during the winter as the summer. Sorry. But yeah. Another thing that I wanted to address is powdery mildew. And I haven't seen any on the farm yet, but I have heard grumblings that other people are seeing it. And if you haven't seen powdery mildew, imagine you have like powdered sugar and you like throw it on a plant. That's kind of what it would look like. So if you see something like that on I usually see it first on my broadleaf plantain, the weed, Though they're not, they could be, I use them for mosquito bites, but I usually see it on that first, but it'll get, usually with time, your cucumbers and your squashes, pumpkins, anything like roses, grapes. And so powdery mildew, you know, I think I'll do a whole video on powdery mildew because I think it's really not well understood. A lot of people think that powdery mildew comes from overwatering, but actually what it comes, the spores are able to, it's a fungus, and it's able to take hold on leaves that are weak or damaged and usually dehydrated from not getting enough water. And then it spreads really quickly. And there's a couple different schools of thought that people do with that. Some people use sprays, whether natural or not. And personally, when I get it, I just ignore it because I feel like nothing makes that big of a difference, and just so many other things going on as well. And so I just leave it. And because usually by the time it sets in, I don't have much time left on the plant anyways. I think conventional wisdom is to remove the leaves that are affected. But for me, I always worry about that just making more airborne spores or cross-contaminating, or like dropping them on a leaf that was otherwise healthy or whatever. So I just leave it and see it as a nightcap to every summer growing season going into the fall. But it's up to you on what your preferred method is. But just keep an eye out and know that some zucchinis, like if you look at my last garden tour, the zucchinis, when I was showing it, they have white spots all over them. That's just a variegation. That's the actual color of even when the leaves were just appearing, they had that. That's not powdery mildew. And so if you've noticed that the entire life of your plant that you've had like more patterned white spots, then that's generally not powdery mildew and just the natural coloring of the leaf. You'll notice powdery mildew starts to grow, and it's like where it's concentrated will be like mostly white, and it literally looks like if you were like clapping with like confection sugar, and it like covers it. Like when you see it, if you don't know what it is, when you see it, you'll know it, if that makes sense. If you're unsure, it's probably not it. But yeah, so I wanted to cover powdery mildew, and you know, to be on the lookout for that. I know some folks, a lot of people think that watering causes it, but I've always believed and heard also that watering helps wash off the spores. And so I don't restrict my watering or anything like that. And I think it's really important. Again, I'll do a whole video because I could talk for a while. I think powdery mildew is very misunderstood, but yeah. And then another thing, I just did a video, I guess 2 videos ago, but if you haven't removed your tomato flowers or pruned the growing tips, the terminal buds of your indeterminate tomatoes, August is the time to do that if you're going to be doing it. And I know, sad time and hard to hear, especially this year. I know that there's a lot of folks out there who are not getting the harvest that is normal, and I can also vouch for that. My plants in the greenhouse are doing really great actually, but I'm telling you, if I didn't have that greenhouse, I wouldn't have the same story, because my outside tomatoes, my outside cucumbers, basically everything that I have inside and outside is like a night and day difference. And I definitely like feel for, especially if it's your first year and your tomato harvest or whatever, any of the heat loving crops, if your harvest isn't what you thought it would be, just know that it's a bad year for everybody, and not to take it too hard, and that try again next year. I promise it should be better, hopefully. And then as far as another gardening tip for July, you've probably already harvested your garlic. If you haven't, I would assume that you need to get on that. And then it's also going to be coming time soon, or may already, but for me it's coming soon, but is to harvest your onions. And then of course shallots and stuff like that as well. But for onions, for garlic, when 50% of the leaves die back, that's when you want to pull it. And you don't want to wait too long, but you also don't want to go too early, because if you go early, the last like couple weeks is really when the bulb formation happens. And so you can drastically have a smaller yield. But if you wait too late and they start to separate, that's even worse. So it's better to harvest earlier than later. If you haven't harvested yet now, you're probably already at later. And so, yeah, with onions, when the stems start to fall down on their own, once that stem, even if it's damaged by like a kid kicking a soccer ball into it or anything, or you stepping on it, or an animal or the wind or whatever, as soon as that stem, like if this is the onion, as soon as that stem flops over, that bulb will not grow. It doesn't matter if it was early spring, excuse me, late spring, early summer, early fall, whenever. Once that stem is broken over, that bulb will not grow. And I usually look for about half, maybe like 30% of the stems falling over in my onions. And I'm not there yet, but I'm getting pretty close. So I think mid-August, excuse me, I got like a tickle in my throat. Mid-August is probably when I'll harvest my onions. And another thing on onions, another thing on onions is you want to remember what kind you planted. So one of the most popular kinds are the Walla Walla onions. But Walla Walla onions, though absolutely delicious, they are not storage onions. Storage onions are different than like sweet onions or whatever. And so storage onions like the Patterson, you can store those for up to a year and they're fabulous for that. But Walla Wallas, they're not storage onions, meaning that if you grew different kinds of onions and you have Walla Wallas, you want to get through your Walla Wallas first, or trade with a fellow gardening friend who has storage onions or something like that. If you keep the Walla Wallas and try to treat them like a storage onion, some of them will do okay, but a lot of times they're going to get soft or go bad or start sprouting, or you'll run into a lot of problems because they're bred for that beautiful big size and amazing flavor. They're not bred for hardiness and storage. The Pattersons don't have the same flavor or the same size, but they'll last a really long time. So just remember that when you're curing your onions, that you know what kind that you have, or if you're just having a little bit to grow fresh, then you don't even have to worry about it. As I say, as we head into August, we are hopefully going to get more rain, which is great for watering the garden. And I was gonna mention a little tip. This isn't a you have to do type of thing. This is just this is a great thing to do. Is I always try and plan, especially for seeding outdoors. If I know that I've got rain in the next couple days, that's when I'm gonna want to seed. I mean, I still seed even if there isn't rain coming for 2 weeks. But if I'll try and look ahead at the weather and think of like, okay, is there anything that I was planning on seeding in the next week? And if there's rain in a couple days, I will seed them before the rain, just because the rain, it works magic. You know, there's natural nitrogen and all that stuff in the rain, and it just really makes those plants pop. And so if you can help it, plant before a rain. If you can't, still no worries. You know, it is what it is. And the last tip that before I talk about seeds to start is to start saving your eggshells now. So a lot of plants, especially tomatoes, like to use a lot of calcium. And there's different ways. Of course, there are fertilizers and stuff like that have calcium. But if you're wanting to take a more natural approach, eggshells, especially if they're homegrown eggs or bought from a local farm that doesn't put like oil or bleach on them, then the eggshells are a wonderful way to use. But it's best if they're still good, even if they're fresh, but they're better if they are composted or let to rot. And so what I do is all summer, I save my eggshells, which I go through a pretty good amount. And then I add a little bit of compost in with them. And then during the winter, I just put them in the back of like a little storage area and forget about them. And then come early spring, I pull that bucket out, everything's had time to kind of break down a little bit, and then the calcium is more bioavailable or easier to be extracted by the plants and the roots. And so yeah, so if you're thinking ahead for next year, go ahead and start saving those eggshells, and your winter, or not winter, your summer garden for next year will thank you. Now to get into seeds that are to plant in August. Again, we're not doing any big main season crops. So, not doing the cucumbers, tomatoes, squashes, pumpkins, any of those things, but there's still a whole lot of stuff that we can get in the ground. And for me, I think almost all of these I plan to be getting in pretty soon, but I've got my handy little list. Arugula, amazing. Asian greens, all of them, anything from bok choy, tatsoi, all those things. Beets, regular cabbage, as well as Chinese cabbage. Of course, you're not, the cabbage you're looking at for overwintering, and not for you're not going to have that ready in a month. Cabbage, I find, takes the longest of everything. Carrots, yum. Definitely plant carrots. Please plant carrots. Cilantro, collard greens, endive, kale, lettuce, mustard greens, onions, radishes, radicchio, scallions, spinach, Swiss chard, and turnips. You are always welcome to, that's not an exhaustive list, it's things that I could think of, and that I'll be planting. There are, always feel free to experiment, or down in the comments, share things if I missed something, or you found that whatever crop grows best planted in this time, or any other tips that I missed or anything. But yeah, so happy August and happy gardening, and I hope that you and your garden survive the heat wave, and should be in for cooler weather and getting ready for that fall and then winter garden. Thank you for watching, and have a great day. Bye.